Hey everyone, and welcome to Atlas Insights, where we look at the customer service department within Trilogy Software and our AI first approach to both customer service and automations in general. You're very welcome today to another episode. In the studio, we have Benji, our resident Python expert, and here today to talk to us about his development, Atlas Insights, a tool used by senior management and product managers to analyze the tickets that we have in central support to identify trends and opportunities for improvement. Welcome, Benji.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. So, yeah, I suppose you were set a task. I think there was two L3 set the task to go away separately and come up with a solution to this kind of need for a deep dive on a regular basis across any one or a number of our products, and kind of trying to give those insights, hence why it's so aptly named as an Atlas product. So maybe talk a bit about how you got started and the process you took.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you noted, it was kind of a pretty open-ended, um, request. Sort of, what makes customers sad, right? The main pain points, and kind of see how we could fit, kind of tack in some LLM capabilities into like our reporting. So we've already got some decent reporting up front, but maybe we could use it to get some deeper insights, and that was kind of the main ask. Um, it was pretty wide open. There was no specifics that we were kind of aiming for, but you could see here on screen. This is sort of a more traditional approach to try to grouping together tickets, right? You know, ideally for this particular product, I think this is actually Jive. When you look here, it's basically using a traditional analysis of the customer summaries, the customer input. We're getting like three clusters, which obviously doesn't really map to the sorts of tickets we're getting. We know we're kind of sitting somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20 or so, 27 possible categories of tickets. So it wasn't a great way to get deeper insights, right? So we're hoping to kind of see how we can fit an LLM into that process. And it kind of began as most LLM projects do, kind of just build up a sort of monolith of a LLM prompt, see what comes out, and after you fail gloriously, kind of adapt from there. Um, I began with sort of a pretty linear system, which you can kind of see here, seeing sort of like that cyborg approach, right? How can I and the LLM work together to reach an end goal? Which in the initial data collection, it's pretty much all me. It's me and a little bit of Python, but for the most part, it's gathering up all the details, sticking it into a bucket, and then kind of seeing what you can get out of it. As I went, I found that the processing, the summarization, categorization, these sorts of things were very clearly going to be LLM focused. So they're sort of backloaded to the entire process, and um, with that sort of traditional linear pipeline, you're really kind of taking like a very I guess it's like collaborative. It's you and the LLM sort of working back and forth, do some exploratory analysis, pull some insights out, see if I could throw it at the LLM, see what sticks. And it was working. We got some pretty decent early results out of it. I spent about I don't know, maybe 6 hours over a weekend just kind of getting some initial results, and I would say they were like 20% better than what you could get just throwing pandas at it, right? Um, but I didn't really want to spend the time for every single product every single week doing this analysis, right? So, um, plus it's kind of boring. It's kind of a part of it. When you do exploratory analysis and you're kind of digging through Python or a pandas data frame, you can get some great insights out, but it's boring. It's it's very low level, and using LLMs in this way, although it is their bread and butter, I thought maybe we could kind of get a little bit more interesting. So actually, following up a conversation that well, you kind of prompted it rather into the team chat, mentioning wanting to spin up, starting to get to use AutoGen. Seeing how AutoGen could be used, and I sort of thought to myself, well, this might be a great use case for AutoGen. I kind of done some playing with chat dev, um, which is kind of a fun. I would call it like the Playmobil, or the sort of kiddie version of AutoGen. And although it's powerful, um, I hadn't really explored AutoGen, so I thought this would be a great opportunity. Create up a couple of agents and sort of move this process away from this sort of linear pipeline to um, a bit more of a collaborative. between the LLMs themselves, see what we can get out of it. So I kind of started heading in that direction, and I started to see markedly improved results. I found that by chunking out this process in sort of these iterative loops, you kind of get some obviously better results out of the LLMs. For the most part, I've been using um, GPT, uh, mostly for Turbo, the preview, just for the
Mhm.
bigger context window. But I tried to play a little bit initially with some local models, see what I can get out of Llama and the likes, and the results were okay. But I found that it's hard to beat GPT-4 at the current stage. Throw money at the problem, right? So, um, but yeah, so it sort of evolved from this sort of linear monolith, and I started breaking down the prompt and seeing where I could, kind of introduce more agents along the way. And I think the first big kind of win I got was when I started to kind of take this ticket researcher approach. I think I snagged an initial run of this assistant here. It was just like a really simple, really low level prompt. This is like, you know, kind of a you know, uh, what do we call it? Play wheels prompt. It's very straightforward, but the results you get out of it are really, really fantastic. It's just the idea of taking a prompt, breaking it down to the smallest possible pieces. And I found that by using these approaches, you start to get deeper and deeper insights. And you can iterate on this, create an agent that analyzes the agent, the response of the agent, and you sort of create this great loop. And in the end, I think I'm kind of sitting somewhere in the neighborhood of like, I think I have 11 prompts with a couple of iterations there. Um, it's kind of become a sort of a hefty beast, but I still haven't fully agentized the entire process. But everything was designed with that end goal in mind. So um, I would say at the current moment, basically what we've got is a system of non-agentized agent prompts that are sort of collaborating in a very hard-coded fashion. So hope to see that improve in the future, though.
Cool, excellent. And so this is kind of your structure now, or this is the plan, kind
Yeah,
of phase two?
yeah, this is kind of phase two already. So I've kind of already moved away from the very linear system. It is technically still a pipeline of sorts, right? There's no
Yeah.
autogen collaboration going on, but I've kind of aimed to keep everything broken down into tooling functions. So there's like 800 lines, something like this, of tooling functions that I've drafted, and they're all designed with that end goal in mind. But this is the flow. So it's sort of this upfront process where I've kind of tried to implement on those four initial stages of like the gather, prepare, generate, and analysis. I've tried to integrate LLMs at each possible step because after getting the process rolling, I was kind of asked, okay, this is great. The results were frankly pretty awesome,
Yep.
but I had to be involved. I was still, although the LLM was doing a lot of the analysis of the data, I was still preparing it. I was still sanitizing it, doing a lot of the hands-on work there. So I tried to pull in the LLM into more stages of that process, and this is kind of where it's at now. Um, Currently, it's sort of less of a pipeline and more of a maze of tunnels, I guess you could say. But there's sort of this upfront sanitization where at the moment I'm completely hands off. I could run these reports with a click of the button, which is ideal because I don't want to spend the time doing the exploratory analysis anymore. And I dump it into a pandas data frame and kind of do this recursive loop, pulling out org level sentiment analysis and segment out the population, and then do some post processing with an LLM, run it through a couple times and sort of tack everything into this sort of monster of a data frame that gets built up. Um, After a bit, the system will then run it all through and start pulling out the pain points. You get those pain points, you get some chart details, and I guess some traditional pandas automation is in place. So a lot of those tooling functions are effectively just running the steps that I identified through the initial runs. Just basically package those up into a function so that eventually an agent could call them. But at this point, kind of create a nice little semi-automated process, or I guess at this point it's pretty well fully automated. But um, yeah, and then finally, kind of push it out. You end up with a sort of a sea of information for each customer population segmentation. Currently, we're doing top 10 customers by volume. Who's
Mhm.
opening the most tickets? What are those tickets about? what are the the pain points that we're seeing within those tickets versus the sentiment that we're getting out of it, and kind of creating some insights there. Some of the most interesting results I've seen in some of the reports is we're getting like absolutely slammed for certain features. I mean, you'd think that the population, customers would be incredibly upset about this, but actually it doesn't seem to be the case. You look over these tickets, and although this is where all of the tickets are coming from, they actually are pretty happy. You're seeing that it doesn't necessarily there's not always an obvious sort of causation to tickets to anger, right? And that's kind of what this helps reveal. So
Okay, yeah. It's no, I mean it's interesting. It's amazing in scope, as you said. The reports I've read one or two, well, actually four or five at this point of the reports, and they're exceptionally insightful, as which is good again coming from the name. But in terms of the content, it's because it's being digested by both high level and kind of more on the front line kind of people, depending on what it is they're looking at. But it because it's visual as well as text, you've actually brought there's a lot of visualization of those metrics so that the person reading it is actually getting some sort of like something that they can understand and read at a high level. Red is bad, green is good, but that you can actually extrapolate a bit more and see. You can have a bit of trust that the recommendations are based on something. It's not a hallucination, or it's not a overstretching its mark. It's quite good for digestion by management.
thank you. Yeah, I tried to lean into that. The visualizations are all generated through Matplot, so it's
Okay.
pulling straight from the pandas data frame. And I had some interesting findings when trying to figure out how I could take all the data from the data frame and kind of push it into the LLMs, right? And I what I've kind of ended up coming up with, which is sort of that last stage there, that final input collection. It's basically concatenating it all and presenting the data in um, sort of sentence form structure. So pulling it out of the data frame and developing a couple of sentences that describe the data within the data frame itself, and then compositing this into sort of a micro report to provide to the LLM and basically say, hey, so here's a text summary of what the data frame says. Um, you know, what do you find interesting about that information? And that process kind of iterates a couple times until you get something workable out. And then obviously, because those insights are straight from the data frame, it's easy to then spin them up into candlestick diagrams or whatever the case may be, right?
Cool. Excellent. And in terms of kind of stumbling blocks or the biggest blockers, like what was it, those ones where you go, this is going to really slow me down, and how do you kind of get by those?
I guess, I mean, truthfully, the process was more or less fairly smooth. Um, I found that the biggest hurdle was trying to think for the intended audience, right? I know what's interesting to us in support. I know what we
Yeah.
care about, but I had to sort of like take on that persona of, I'm not a support agent. I am a, XYZ, right? So taking on that persona and thinking through like, um, you know, what would they even care about? That was probably the biggest part, and that's where I
Mhm.
started to think about like the organization level. They don't necessarily care about um, some of the metrics we do. They might be more interested in what the high volume customers are interested in, or maybe the high value customers. What do they want?
Yep.
What are their pain points? So that was the biggest part. Another was um, frankly moving from that sort of classic approach, the monolith prompting, throwing that was a bit of a hurdle to try to say how can I best break this down into a process while retaining the data in pandas. Um, it's pretty easy to spit out like paragraphs of text from an LLM, but how do you spit it out in such a way that you could then plug it back into a data frame to then do analysis on it, right? So that was a bit of a tricky bit, and um, turns out LLMs are pretty good at parsing text, so that was a part of it. So chain it up, create various prompts and splitting it out, trying to create a situation where you could do like a few prompt scenarios where you can kind of give it some examples and kind of guarantee, or at least have a higher chance of getting some standardized output. Was a big part of it. once you've got it in a pretty standard output, you could then create functions that can iterate over them, clean them up, and sanitize accordingly.
Cool, excellent. And I suppose what's next for Atlas Insights? What happens? Like, I presume not only is it now analyzing all the tickets we have, you'll have to get one to analyze the feature requests for Atlas Insights itself.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the moment, the biggest one I have in mind is trying to get more insights from more data. So right now, I'm pretty limited. It's very much focused on the customer tickets themselves, right? That's what I have direct access to. Um, but there are, or rather, there is so much more that you can grab out in this sort of report. You know, when you're kind of giving a breakdown for what are the pain points, building projections based on support tickets alone is not really sufficient. So I think that there's the potential for bringing in additional agents, I guess, is really where my head's at. You know, right now I've sort of got a ticket researcher, I've got a data analyst, a data scientist, you know, these sort of roles that I've developed for these agents. But um, beyond making it more agentized, that's definitely a big goal. I would like to get something like a external data researcher, you know, um,
Okay.
who are the decision makers within these organizations? You know, what do they actually care about? And does it align with what we're seeing in the tickets? These are the sorts of things that would kind of be curious to me.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of addressing I'm trying to think of the best way of putting it. Like, I know these basically take the place of what were deep dives maybe 2 years ago in the company, where you would go in, you would just look at tickets and come up with analysis, but you are very much pigeonholed in looking at just ticket data. And so you're left. I mean, it's a pretty good view of how the product is performing in a bad sense, almost, almost like the was it survivor theory, or what, the analogy of the World War II plane with the bullet holes in it. You're just seeing the stuff that's not working, but like, what stuff is working that if you were to work on that would actually make the customer 10 times happier than fixing that weird typo on page 2.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see how and where we source that information from, because it would be difficult, within the systems that we have, unless you got access maybe to the core statistics in an app, if the product was identifying those.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And even
cool.
things like
Okay.
sales data, you know, we've got tons of we have many teams within the company that interact with customers, but we don't, at least currently, Atlas Insight is mostly focused on the support side, right? So even
Yep.
just getting details from Salesforce, you know, incorporate the interactions that take place there. You know, what are the account managers hearing? Adding that in, I think that would give us a more robust look at
Yeah.
segments.
And even, not that I want to add to your Atlas Insights work, but I mean, like adding in competitor products and being able to say, well, look, these are the things you're focused on. We noticed that the two biggest competitors in the market have done X and Y and already addressed it, or they're going in a different direction. Maybe you should know why you're going in a different direction. So now I think that alone has probably added 3 or 4 weekend projects to your list. So maybe we should cut that, just in case anyone gets any big ideas to, give you a couple of weeks.
Yeah, but that's the exact sort of thing I had in mind. You know, with the idea of autogen in mind, I see these projects where people create researchers where, you know, every email comes in, they find out who it's from, the bots go out, they scrape, they find out about the company, grab some insights, and you kind of get an idea outside of the ticket base. You know, is this company shrinking? Is it growing? You know, maybe they're completely happy with the product, but you know, an agent with a little bit of Google time can find out that, well, they might be shrinking. So churn is a very big possibility, despite what the tickets alone are saying. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I had in mind. Although you're right, it will be probably a bit more ambitious than what it currently is.
Yeah, and I mean, it's even where you extrapolate that information from, because I had a conversation recently where someone was saying that an identifier that a company maybe isn't doing as well as it was is its ad spend. Does it drop its ad spend or pause it? Because cash is kind of in short supply in the company at the moment, and ad spend, particularly in the likes of Google, is very much pay it when it's due. There's no alternative. So it is interesting to see, where could you get the information? How could you feed it in? how do you interpret it, or do you leave that all to the the AI itself? And in terms of, dare I say it, were there hallucinations? How did you kind of control the tendency of the, like, give me the three top reasons? It finds two and goes, ah, sure, here's one I've made up earlier.
Yeah, I mean, a part of that was, I'd say hallucinations in their most traditional sense was less of an issue
Okay.
the farther into the project I got. At first, they were incredibly apparent and an absolute pain to deal with. Um, More often than not, I ran into self consistency problems and just lost in the middle. That was the biggest issues I had. Throwing this huge context at the LLM. 9 times out of 10, it's going to go, okay, yeah, yeah, things are going well, and it starts to kind of give you its output, and then towards the end, it gets a little bit lazy, and it wraps it all up with a strong conclusion. And the reports were reflecting that. So I found that by breaking it down into the smallest possible pieces, like for example, doing an initial pass, find me the main pain points based on the analysis, then take that, strip it out into a couple of strings, and then pass each of those back into an LLM and say, hey, look at this information and give me some insights. And you kind of take those and compare them. Um, I would say that something I would definitely like to add as part of the agentization process is an explicit QC agent that is kind of monitoring that input to
Yep.
prevent that. That is definitely something I've been fiddling around with, and the results so far are positive, but I don't know that they are with the small data sets I've been working with because I'm doing weekly reports at the moment
Mm.
uh, and monthly in some cases. It, I don't know that it fully justifies the extra cost. I mean, it's not a huge cost, but the results before and after a QC prompt goes through it initially, right now, with just the raw ticket data, it hasn't been. I, I would say it's not strictly necessary so far, but it is something I'd like to explore,
Cool.
especially when we start adding in external data, right?
Yeah, yeah. But when you hear it's going to start, being used to drive like $1 million decisions, then you'll be like, oh, we should definitely invest a few euro in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
we'll buy
yeah.
a couple of tokens just to be sure.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
thing. It's
yeah,
it's the reports themselves. They only cost a couple dollars to run, which is frankly kind of impressive.
yeah.
I ran one this morning. It was 88 cents to do a whole week's worth of ticket data. Um, it's not too shabby. So tacking
Yeah.
on an extra dollar for peace of mind is probably fine.
Yeah, and even if you go the auto gen route, and you've got those agents, the user agent personas that you can actually say, this is report is for digestion by this person. Let's let's make sure that we're driving with that quality focus in mind, or similar. So yeah, no, that that makes sense, and it really does show the benefit of what you've done with the swarm kind of, getting a load of agents working in tandem. And yeah, as you say, I'm an auto gen uh, convert and marketing. I should be their marketing person at this point, because it's yeah, it's an exceptional tool, and that even that you've done it kind of separate to it, but the same principle. AutoGen
Yeah.
is just the tool that I use. Excellent. Okay. Any insights you want to share for people who come after, who decide this is something they're going to do?
I would say the best insight I can give, as with any LLM projects, when you're kind of thinking how in the world am I going to make an LLM do this complex process, is do it manually. Kind of take it yourself, go through it, find the best practices for if you were a XYZ doing whatever, right?
Hmm.
Figure out what the best practices are, implement them yourself. In my case, I built them all out in journals, just Python journals, Jupyter, and kind of go through it step by step, and kind of as you're going through, go, okay, so here are all the steps that I took to achieve a reasonable result. Where is the best places currently with your first iteration to implement an LLM? And then think to yourself, okay, let's be super ambitious. And where can I kind of step it up a notch and just keep doing that iterative process? Plan it
Yeah.
all out. When the LLM is generating most of it, kind of go, yep, open up a chat GPT window and say, hey, GPT, let's get ambitious. Where can we kind of make this way more complex and waste another weekend? And it will have some amazing ideas for you, I promise.
Oh yeah, no, it's I've a couple of them on the go now at the moment, trying to streamline even this podcast process. So like, you basically say, look, you're my marketing person, you're my Twitter person, you're my podcast editor, you do it. But
Yeah.
it's only because like we're at episode what, 7, 8. Like now, as you said, you've done it all manually. You did the first couple of video edits yourself. You did the first this yourself, that, and then you go, well, this is either automatable without any GPT, it's just automatable by script, or this could use an LLM to interpret the transcript, run this, run that. So it's it is amazing, and it's funny. Yeah, you think, and to a certain degree, it's the reverse of how I code with GPT. With GPT coding wise, I will tell it what I want roughly and get it to do the first iteration, and then I'll refine it. With this, it's almost the reverse. You
Yeah.
do the first iteration, and then GPT can refine it.
Exactly.
So no, that's pretty good learnings. Excellent. Okay. Well, I think that about covers it. It's an amazing kind of insightful tool. Again, I love the fact that, every time I mention it, I'm using the right words with it. Atlas Insights. So that's good. But it's an impressive product so far. Really excited to see how, it progresses with its extra data points. And yeah, thanks very much, Benji.
Very welcome. Happy to be here.
Cheers. Bye now.